You ever look at some of the kindest, most empathetic people you know and wonder why they always seem to end up in these draining relationships with narcissists? I mean, it doesn't seem to make any sense, right? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the unseen patterns that make this happen over and over again.
So this is really the big question, isn't it? Why them? It's definitely not because they're weak or flawed in some obvious way. The answer is a bit more tangled than that, and it has everything to do with a very, very specific dynamic.
And this right here is probably the most important idea to get your head around from the get-go. This isn't about blaming someone for having a flaw. It's about a fit. It's like these two puzzle pieces that just tragically and really dangerously click together, where one person's best qualities perfectly complement the other person's worst.
Okay, so let's start with the stuff you can actually see, the outward behaviors. We're going to call this whole thing the empathy trap. These are traits that, in a healthy relationship are seen as wonderful virtues. But for a narcissist, they look a lot like an open invitation.
So what does this look like in real life? Well, you get this very specific profile of a people pleaser. This is someone who gives and never asks for anything back. They offer unlimited second chances, and they're terrified of hurting someone's feelings. So what do? They swallow insults just to keep the peace. They can't say no. They stay deeply, deeply committed to people who give them absolutely nothing in return. For a narcissist, this is basically an all-you-can-eat buffet of what's called narcissistic supply, that constant stream of attention and validation they need to survive.
And this slide, wow, this really drills down to the core of it. Look at what happens in just one moment of conflict. On one side, you have the victim's reaction. They swallow the insult, they push their anger down, and what happens? Their personal boundaries just start to crumble. But now look at the other side. The narcissist doesn't just say something mean, they actually enjoy it. For them, it's a power trip. It reinforces their sense of dominance. It's the exact same moment, but they're living in two completely different realities. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that crazy power imbalance. One person feels ashamed just for wanting basic respect and kindness, while the other person feels zero shame in taking all of that away. All right, so we've talked about the external behaviors. Now, let's go deeper and talk about the internal world, because what's happening on the inside is just as crucial for keeping this whole cycle going. We're calling this the muted alarm. Emotional confusion. You know that awful twisting feeling in your gut when you know something is off, but you talk yourself out of it? Your intuition is basically screaming at you, but your brain is busy making excuses. That gap, that disconnect between what you feel deep down and what you decide to accept, that's where the real danger is. It all starts with just a little flicker. A tiny signal from your gut, a knot in your stomach, a flash of unease that says, hey, that wasn't right. That's your intuition just trying to do its job. But what happens next? Almost instantly, that feeling gets shoved down, ignored, you explain it away, you tell yourself, oh, I'm just being too sensitive, or I'm sure I'm overreacting. You're basically hitting the snooze button on your own internal alarm system. And then that inner voice turns on you, and it gets vicious. You might beat yourself up for being 5 minutes late, but then completely excuse the narcissist's cruel, cutting remark. You start punishing yourself for tiny things while forgiving them for huge betrayals. It's a completely warped internal justice system. So what's the end result of all this internal chaos? You find yourself getting attached to this toxic person, and fast. Why? Because this cycle of confusion and self-blame can actually feel more familiar and, in a really weird way, more comfortable than healthy, stable love. The toxicity becomes a kind of comfort zone. This chart kind of breaks down that inner turmoil into 4 big pieces. You can see how this just feeds on itself, right? The chronic emotional deprivation leaves you starving for any scrap of affection. The repressed emotions mean none of the hurt ever actually goes away. The overthinking keeps you stuck in your head, analyzing every little thing. And that exaggerated guilt and shame makes you feel like, somehow, you actually deserve to be treated this way. Each one just makes the others worse. Okay, but listen. Understanding all of this isn't about blaming yourself. Not at all. It's about finding the exit. And that awareness we've been talking about, that's the key that unlocks the door. So let's talk about the path forward. And that's all about rebuilding your boundaries. So how do we actually do this? How do you turn knowing into doing? First, just start acknowledging the patterns in yourself and do it without any judgment. Step 2, start listening to that muted alarm. Treat your gut feelings like important information, not an inconvenience. Third, start practicing your right to say no, even on small things that feel uncomfortable. And finally, build one tiny boundary. If someone says something out of line, just end the conversation. It's not about being dramatic, it's about quietly teaching people how you expect to be treated.
And if you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this. You don't have to become a different person overnight. Just understanding these dynamics, the empathy trap on the outside and that muted alarm on the inside, that simple awareness is the first and honestly the most powerful step in building your defense. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. If you think about your personal boundaries as the walls that protect your peace, your well-being, your very sense of self, who have you been handing the keys to?